Jesus did say it's easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one jot or tittle of the law to fail. I don't believe the law failed. I believe it fulfilled its purpose. See, Paul compared it to a child becoming a man. We read it in Galatians in my presentation. What did Paul say? We were under the law when we were children. Now we're men. We're adults. You see, when a little boy grows up, the little boy isn't there anymore. There's a man instead. But he hasn't been destroyed. He's been fulfilled. The growing up to maturity is not a destruction of the child. It's the fulfillment of what the child's very presence anticipated. And the law anticipated Christ. Christ did come and he did fulfill the law. And sure, sometimes the word fulfill can refer to keeping it. I don't doubt that Jesus kept the law much of the time, although the Bible does speak of some laws that he broke. He let himself be touched by a leper, or by a woman with an issue of blood, or by other people that were unclean. Jesus didn't really keep the laws down to the last drop because he was the Lord of those laws. He said he was the Lord of the Sabbath day. He said that when he was defending his disciples because they weren't keeping the Sabbath. The Pharisees criticized them for it. Now, some people say, well, they were keeping the Sabbath. They just weren't keeping the Pharisees' ideas about the Sabbath. No, Jesus said that what they were doing was like David eating the showbread. That was breaking a law of God. In fact, Jesus even said in Matthew 12, David ate it, and it was not lawful for him to eat it. Like my disciples are doing something that's not lawful to do on the Sabbath, David did something that was not lawful to do, and you don't criticize him. Then he says that the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath every Sabbath, and they're guiltless. What's he mean they profane it? They work the same work on the Sabbath as any other day. That's what you're not supposed to do on the Sabbath. The command is do your work 6 days and don't do it on the seventh day. Jesus said the priests in the temple, they continually profane the Sabbath. They treat it like any other day. He said, but they're blameless. Apparently keeping the Sabbath isn't absolute.
This question is for Steve. There was a few folks that had referenced, you mentioned that Jesus had broke the law. Mm-hmm. Where in the Bible does it say that he broke the Sabbath? Your time starts now.
It says it specifically in John chapter 5 and verse 18. Now, what it says is, therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill Jesus because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Now it says, and the person who said he broke the Sabbath is John. The Pharisees didn't say Jesus broke the Sabbath. They wanted to kill him because he had, John says. John is the one who has assessed what Jesus did as breaking the Sabbath. And he said, therefore they wanted to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, but that he also said his Father is God. Now, some say, well, but he can't break the Sabbath because that'd make him a sinner. No, it would not. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. He has authority to do whatever he wants on the Sabbath. He's not under the Sabbath. It's under him. If he's the Lord of the Sabbath is under him, not him under it. Just like a policeman can go down the highway at 90 miles an hour over the speed limit, certainly, with his lights flashing and siren on, because he's authorized to. I can't do that. I'd be breaking a law that I'm not allowed to break. The policeman's violating the speed limit, but he's authorized to do it. Jesus could violate the Sabbath or many other laws, like the dietary laws. He could let people touch him if they've got an issue of blood. He could do things that the law didn't permit because he's the Lord. He was the Lord of the Sabbath, and therefore, see, they didn't believe he was. So when he broke the Sabbath
30 seconds.
And said that his Father was God, that offended them. They wanted to kill him. But it's not them that said he broke the Sabbath. It's John that says he did. It's John's assessment. You can't read that verse honestly without recognizing that it's John who tells us Jesus broke the Sabbath.
All right, Doug, you have 1 minute to respond to that. Your time starts now.
I believe when John said, because he had broken the Sabbath, and it does say that, Jesus broke their regulations relating to the Sabbath. We've got to be careful not to read too much into what others said about Jesus, because they said that Jesus was a Samaritan, he was demon-possessed. They said that he was a drunkard, a wine-bibber, and Jesus wasn't any of those things. Sin, we've got to be careful about saying Jesus could whimsically just break his own law, because sin is defined as transgression of the law. And we are saved because Jesus was sinless. And it says, who committed no sin. If you look in John chapter 15, verse 10, Jesus said, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I don't believe that Jesus ever broke the 10 commandments.
Steve said that Jesus broke the Sabbath by healing on the Sabbath, and that made him a lawbreaker. So the conclusion is that Jesus was a sinner. Can you please explain?
Yeah, Steve makes the point several times of saying, well, Jesus didn't keep, he touched a leper, and you're not supposed to touch a leper. Now, if Jesus touched a leper and the leper wasn't cleansed, then Jesus would have been contaminated by the leper. But when Jesus touched the leper, instead of the uncleanness going from the leper to Jesus, the cleanliness from Jesus went into the leper. He reversed the polarity, you might say. And so he wasn't being defiled because he cleansed the man on contact. And that was, he mentioned several cases like that. Jesus never broke one of the 10 commandments. That's why Jesus says in John chapter 15, verse 10, he says, I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And Peter says, Christ did no sin. Christ lived a sinless life. Sin is the transgression of the law. Jesus died for our sins because the law could not be changed, and the penalty for breaking the law is death. So the idea that Jesus broke the law, that to me I think is the most outrageous thing of everything that Steve said. That undermines the whole purpose of why Christ came. No, Jesus did not sin. He never broke the 10 commandments. He gave us an example that we should keep them. Can you imagine? Jesus, he commands those laws from the mountain, and he writes them with his finger. He says, if you even touch the mountain, the beast was to be thrust through if it touched the mountain. It was a holy mountain. God spoke. He met with his people, and he makes his covenant with his people. Here are, the Bible calls it in one place, the 10 words that he spoke. It is a perfect summary of the will of God.